afternoon, everyone. My name is Don Parkinson, and I'm a Senior Consultation Specialist with S&C Lavalin. Today, we are continuing our series of live stream topics on the Northern Road Link project as it moves through the provincial environmental assessment and federal impact assessment processes. The topics we are covering parallel our project activities, so we hope these will help our viewers and listeners get a better understanding of the project and provide input along the way. So why don't we get started? Today we're going to talk about alternative corridors for the Northern Road Link project to help community members get an understanding of the thinking behind and the activities associated with this part of the project. So I think what we're going to do in all of these presentations going forward is make sure everyone is up to the sort of the same level and completely updated on where we are in the process. So we're going to run through that, and then we'll focus a little bit of time on that key on our focus for today, which is the alternative corridors, and then we'll do a bit of a summary at the end. So we hope this is helpful in sort of following along as the project moves through the federal and provincial environmental and impact assessment processes. So let's give you some background on this project. The Northern Road Link project is a proposed all-season road in northwestern Ontario on Treaty 9 land. Uh, the idea is for it to connect the Ring of Fire mineral development area with the all-season highway network via the proposed Martin Falls Community Access Road. But at the same time, this will provide an opportunity for Webequie First Nation to connect to the all-season highway network through its Webequie Supply Road as well. And I'll get into the details when I show you a map in a minute. This project is subject to both the Environmental Assessment Act and the Federal Impact Assessment Act. There is a provincial environmental assessment and a federal impact assessment. Processes are currently underway right now. The proponents or the sponsors of the project are Martin Falls First Nation and Webequie First Nation. They're both remote Indigenous communities about 500 to 600 kilometers north of Thunder Bay. And obviously aren't currently accessible by all-season roads. So they are serviced by winter roads, which are open for an increasingly shorter window of time each year, it seems. There have been a number of previous studies undertaken in this region looking at an all-season road to the Ring of Fire. And then in 2020, the province of Ontario, Martin Falls First Nation, and Webequie First Nation announced an agreement to work together where the communities agreed to conduct an environmental assessment and impact assessment for the project funded by the province. So, in terms of this project and how it interacts with the other road projects that are going on that you are probably familiar with, there are, as you probably know, 3 proposed all-season road projects in the region right now, and they're each undergoing separate environmental assessments and impact assessments. They were initiated at different times for different reasons. The Northern Road Link, as I mentioned, will connect the Ring of Fire to the all-season highway network via the Martin Falls Community Access Road. And then the Northern Road Link will connect the Webequie Supply Road to the Martin Falls Community Access Road and the Provincial Highway Network as well. The Webequie Supply Road runs from Webequie First Nation Airport to the Ring of Fire area where it would connect with the Northern Road Link. And the purpose of the Northern Road Link project is to enable economic activity by helping the transport of goods, services, and resources. In terms of the project components, it's more than just a 2-lane gravel road. Uh, it could range in length between 117 and 164 kilometers, depending on which final alternative corridor segments are chosen. and we'll get into that a little bit later on. Approximately, the right of way would be approximately 100 meters wide with a cleared area of about 60 meters. Um, as you can imagine, there would be numerous water crossings using culverts and bridges as water crossing structures. There is one large bridge crossing at the Attawapiskat River, which is over 200 meters in width or span. And of course, as I mentioned, there is additional infrastructure associated with the two-lane gravel road, including storage and laydown areas, which would be temporary during construction for the storage and laydown storage of materials and equipment. Um, there would be permanent maintenance facilities and yards located at um, various points along the project, access roads to access other facilities such as gravel pits and quarries. Uh, there would be aggregate sites to get the material such as gravel and rock to help build the road with, and then construction camps to house workers, provide accommodations to workers during construction, and there would be multiple camps along the way. So now focusing a bit on the alternative corridors, there are 12 alternative corridor segments. They are identified by letters. So for example, at the south end, you have A1 or A2 corridor segments. And which one is chosen of these two depends on the chosen corridor for the Martin Falls Community Access Road. This has not been chosen yet, but once it is, that will determine whether the corridor A1 or A2, corridor segment A1 or A2 will be chosen. But as you can see, there are multiple options in certain areas, and then preferred segments would be identified and then strung together to form one continuous corridor running from Martin Falls up to the Ring of Fire as well. Uh, let's move on to the next slide. In terms of the alternative corridors, these were initially identified based on terrain, while also considering known biological and indigenous knowledge constraints. Many of the segments follow the esker, which is sort of an elevated um, piece of land, usually linear in shape, I guess, is the best way to describe it, and comprised of a lot of like finer material, typically gravels as well, and then surrounding these eskers in many areas are peatlands as well, part of the lowlands, the James Bay lowlands. Additional corridors were developed to accommodate the alternate crossing of the Attawapiskat River, and you will see that there are three different crossing locations proposed for the Attawapiskat River right now, two in the west and one in the east. And in terms of these alternative corridors, um, when just to give you an example, when we're looking at the terrain, let's say you were looking at when you're looking at terrain, less suitable areas would be crossing, major water courses or water bodies such as lakes or rivers. Soil plays a role in this too in terms of suitability of terrain, with poorer soils being finer materials such as organic deposits, and through wetland areas as well too. And then the more preferred areas in terms of building roads on better terrain would be the non-organic deposits, so bedrock or glacial fluvial deposits, things like that. Eskers would be included in that as well too. So that just gives you an idea of the kinds of how terrain sort of fits into the alternative corridors, and we are now in the process of assessing these alternatives. Which is part of the process that's required for the provincial environmental assessment. So you consider you where you consider what you call residual or leftover effects after applying what you call mitigation measures being um, measures to reduce impacts of something. So, um, what we're that process involves looking at doing that deep dive into assessing those alternatives. And a part of that process involves developing and applying criteria, which are things to study or things to consider to assess advantages and disadvantages of different alternatives. And then associated with criteria, or also known as valued components, you have indicators, which are ways to measure impacts as well too. And this next slide again, just illustrates terrain suitability. So you see red would be less suitable areas where you would be crossing terrain types such as water courses and water bodies. And then you would move up to orange, which would be organic deposits, yellow, which is not a bad, soil type to build on, but still not the greatest. And then green, which was much more suitable. So non-organic type deposits. And again, we collect this information. We use provincial information, surficial geology maps, um, other geotechnical or like studies of the subsurface, the soils. We use air photos. We use satellite imagery. We use what you call a lidar. Digital elevation information, which gives us really high resolution information on the height of land as well, and helps identify best routes in terms of terrain. So you try to stay away from the really low areas where water would collect. As we move to the next slide, we look at different alternate Attawapiskat River crossings. So as you can see here, we have two west bridge options, two different locations. So they're fairly close to each other. We have option A and option B, and then we have an East Bridge location as well too. So these three alternate crossing locations are being evaluated. They were identified through obviously technical analysis of terrain um, in the approach areas to the north and south, as well as uh, speaking with community members to get a better understanding of sensitive areas in this corridor, in this stretch of the Attawapiskat River as well. In terms of the provincial environmental assessment process, just to keep everyone up to date in terms of where we are now in what's called the assessment phase of the environmental assessment process. We've moved out of the planning phase now that our terms of reference, our work plan has been approved. We issued a notice of commencement a couple of months ago, and so now we are in the heart of the environmental assessment process, where we are conducting baseline studies and doing the assessment of alternatives. On the next slide, we talk a little bit about the terms of reference. So the terms of reference is basically the work plan for the provincial environmental assessment. And our terms of reference, we went through two reviews of the draft and of the proposed terms of reference. Each had a different a period of review. One was for 45 days, which was extended for 30 days for Indigenous communities. The second one, the final review, was the proposed TOR review, which was a 60-day comment period that was extended by an additional 90 days for Indigenous communities as well too. And then we received over 1,000 comments during that time from regulators, indigenous communities, and other stakeholders on the terms of reference, and then made changes to them as required, responded to each one of these comments as well too. We received our terms of reference notice of approval on March 3rd of this year. And as I mentioned before, that was the end of the planning phase, and we moved into the assessment phase of the environmental assessment process. The notice of commencement was published in the first week of April, announcing the environmental assessment was beginning. Letters were sent to chief and councils with offers to meet, um, so that we can begin the process or continue the process of soliciting comments on the project. and we are continuously doing that. We are continuously looking to meet with communities and talk to them, get their feedback on the project, so that we can make sure that this is the most comprehensive process that has been as transparent as possible moving forward. So as I mentioned, the assessment phase of the project involves a lot, an intense amount of baseline data collection and alternatives identification and evaluation. We receive input on those alternatives, whether it's routing, ancillary infrastructure, aggregate or rock sources. We collect that through consultation, through efforts like this to solicit your feedback. Um, we also receive information or input on the criteria and indicators. Remember, I mentioned those before, things that we're studying to help evaluate different corridor alternatives, and indicators, the ways of measuring as well. And then, of course, we're actively collecting information on a regular basis, continuous basis on Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous land and resource use as well from neighboring communities and neighboring communities. So in terms of future project milestones and activities after round one of the the assessment phase, we'll be looking at things like evaluating alternatives, selecting preferred methods, doing a preliminary effects assessment, cumulative effects assessment as well. And then later on after that, we would be preparing the draft environmental assessment report, and then eventually we would move to the final environmental assessment report, which is a document that is crafted to meet both the requirements of the federal impact assessment process and the provincial environmental assessment process. And our consultation and engagement takes many forms. It's not just in community meetings, it's also open houses, it's virtual community meetings um, which work well for communities who are busy with many other activities, and so they can set up a time with us, and we can organize a meeting and virtually to do that. Of course, we would always prefer to visit your community, and we really look forward to coming and visit your community and talk about our project so that we can get your valuable feedback. We also use some other methods such as live streams and radio shows on the Wawate Radio Network, where we talk about, just like we're talking about now, topics paralleling the environmental or impact assessment process, and special technical topics where we might bring in guests who are experts in certain technical disciplines as well too, which we find interests a lot of community members. In terms of an update on the federal impact assessment process, our initial project description was submitted and is complete. We then moved to the detailed project description, which is submitted and complete. And then there was the determination by the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada as to whether an impact assessment was going to be required. We received a letter on May 23rd of this year, so not that long ago, stating that an impact assessment is required. So we are now moving ahead, um, with that direction, and we will be getting the tailored impact statement guidelines, which are effectively the terms of reference or the work plan for the impact assessment. These are prepared by the federal government, by the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada, and then issued to us as the proponents of the project. So it's a little bit different process from the provincial process, where we create the terms of reference and then have it reviewed by the regulator. In this case, it's issued by the regulator, by the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada, based on their review of our detailed and initial project descriptions. So we are expecting to receive these tailored impact statement guidelines, or TISG, by August 20th of this year. So they should be coming soon, and then that will then give us basically our program of work. to undertake over the next few years. So we're almost at the end of today's presentation. I just wanted to do a quick summary on the alternative corridors for everyone. We have 12 alternative corridor segments. Each corridor is 2 kilometers wide, and the reason why we do that is to allow for routing around different constraints that we identify within the corridors or have already identified. As I mentioned before, segments A1 and A2, which are where the segments where we leave the Martin Falls area and move north. Um, the choice of those is dependent on the chosen corridor for the Martin Falls Community, access road. Um, and the shortest combination of corridor segments is 117 kilometers. The longest is 164 kilometers. So that gives you the range of the length of the road potentially. And right now we have 3 alternative Attawapiskat River crossing locations. So those will be evaluated over the next little while, and there will be a preferred crossing location identified. So that wraps up today's presentation. I just encourage you to contact us. We have the next slide should have has a phone number on the screen, an email address, info@northernroadlink.com, and our website, northernroadlink.ca. And that wraps up today's discussion of alternative corridors. We hope this was helpful, and we hope it encourages you to join us again in 2 weeks. Don't forget to keep in touch with our project team members via the contact information available on our website, northernroadlink.ca. Miigwech, and make sure to look out for project updates on social media and our website. We look forward to meeting with your community. If you're interested, please contact our project team and we can move forward with setting a date and time. Miigwech, see you again soon.